Hello, good afternoon. Hello, good afternoon. And this is wishing you a very, very happy Republic Day. Today is 26th of January. And I am recording this small video lecture on the CSR amendments. And the idea basically is to do some kind of discussion on the CSR amendments, particularly the changes in the rules, which were promulgated on the 22nd of January, and seemingly the amendments take immediate effect. So the idea basically is to address some of the issues that might require immediate attention, the deliverables, the actionables which need instant attention. So I would be using a small PPT to keep me on the track. However, the idea basically is to take a quick look at what changes have taken place, including the amendments in the statute which have been made effective simultaneous with the notification of the rules. So here we go. And I must quickly say that this is the first meeting to discuss this particular amendment. So quite often lots of things emerge in course of discussion. So this is my first occasion to discuss these amendments, even though when the draft rules were there, we've discussed the draft rules several times, but this is the first time I'm doing a discussion on the final rules. Let's first get started from the changes in the statute. As one would be aware, the Companies Amendment Act 2020 had introduced a prosecution provision for non-compliance with the CSR provisions. And the bit of history behind that is that originally enacted, the CSR provisions were so-called comply or explain. They had a stance that you either comply with the provisions or give an explanation by way of a board report. And there was an MCA committee report which went into the extent of compliances by companies, and serious gaps in compliance were noticed, and the committee had recommended that nothing short of a mandate would probably help companies to comply. And therefore in 2019, while the rest of the Companies Act went into a decriminalization mode, there was a surprising amendment in section 135 which introduced prosecution by way of imprisonment for non-compliance with section 135. That of course caused a substantial uh, resentment among the industrialists, and the finance minister went public to say that these provisions also will be decriminalized. So the Companies Amendment Act shifted the prosecution provisions of section of the 2019 amendments from imprisonment or fine to a mere payment of a penalty. But the penalty is not small, the penalty is substantial. As amended, 135/7 says that if the company fails to comply with the provisions of CSR, the penalty will be up to twice the amount of shortfall. And that's a substantial expense, or rupees 1 crore, whichever is lower. And that's the penalty on the company. And then there is a penalty on the officers as well. It can go up to 1/10 of the amount of shortfall, or rupees 2 lakhs, whichever is lower. And both these penalties, of course, require adjudication, because the statute talks about an amount up to the specific the specific amount of penalty. So we are not saying that companies will necessarily have to pay twice the amount of shortfall by way of penalty, but the indication is that the government, the MCA, has accorded a substantial seriousness to CSR compliances. It's no more a comply or explain provision. It's now going to the extent of penalization also. That's the implication of non-compliance. But more important than that is the fact that if you have unspent CSR amount, then by way of the amendment rules now, there are certain provisions which now take effect on a potential retention of the unspent money. You can potentially retain the unspent money for what is called ongoing project, but if the money is not required for ongoing projects, in that case it has to go to one of the funds listed in Schedule 7. So we will be discussing those provisions at some bit of length shortly now. But as of now, the statutory amendment basically is to introduce a penal provision in section 135 itself, section 135 subsection 7, and the penalty is not just on the company, the penalty is on the officers as well. I would quickly be moving now to discuss some other amendments in the statute. So one of the amendments in the statute was that if there is an excess spending, there's a deficit of spending, there's a different implication. That could be penalty or requiring to transfer the amount to an unspent CSR fund or one of the specified funds in Schedule 7. That's one possible implication. But there might be situations where the company has spent more than what it was required to spend. If there is therefore an excess spending, the excess spending is eligible to be adjusted by way of a set off against a shortfall in any of the succeeding years. The Act, of course, talks about such number of years as may be prescribed. The prescription has now come by way of rules, and I'll be discussing that as well. Another statutory amendment was that CSR committee. Section 135 talks about a CSR committee, CSR policy, and CSR spending. The three primary requirements of Section 135 are CSR committee, CSR policy, and CSR spending. But the statute brought a small relief to say that if the expenditure based on 2% of average profits does not exceed rupees 50 lakhs, in that case, instead of having a committee, the function, the CSR obligation could be discharged by the board of directors itself. This was another statutory amendment, and this also takes effect from 22nd January by way of the enforcement notification. But like I mentioned, the more important news is that the CSR amendment rules, CSR policy amendment rules 2021 got notified on 22nd January. As many professionals would recall, a draft of the rules was made available in 2020, and the draft was being discussed elaborately everywhere. I would say largely the final rules are largely at par with the draft rules, even though, as one would always expect, there are some deviations from the draft and the final rules. But the final rules actually have brought about several significant changes. So there's a gazette notification of 22nd January, which is making the changes in the CSR policy rules. By the way, the rules are called CSR policy rules, but the rules pertain not just to policy, the rules contain several other significant matters too. So the amendments were notified on 22nd January. And as the notification says, the amendments are immediately effective on the date of the gazette notification. So the amendments actually become effective on 22nd January itself. From point of view of actionables, not everything needs to be done immediately, but there are, of course, several significant actionables, and one needs therefore to attend to the changes introduced by the 22nd January notification. Most importantly, the need to ensure the spending targets for 2020. And I'll be discussing each of these at length. So what are the significant highlights of the amendments and what are the actionables in terms of action points? We'll be discussing that as we proceed further. Let's first look at what are the major highlights of the changes. Number one, there's a spending mandate. Like I mentioned earlier, CSR was originally enacted as a comply or explain provision. And I think on several forums, including one of the articles published in Chartered Secretary recently, I think a couple of months back, 2 or 3 months back, an article titled Tailoring to Fit CSR Provisions Continue to Evolve Over Time. This was an article that I had co-authored with one of my colleagues. In that article as well, we brought about the fact that India is a global exception in that India has equated corporate social responsibility with spending. Most other countries have not focused on spending part. Most other countries have focused on the responsibility part, but India has taken a different route, and the expense, the spending itself is the crux of the responsibility part of companies in Indian law. Like I mentioned earlier, the thrust was comply or explain, but over time it was detected that that's probably not working. So the law is now mandating a spending, and not spending, of course, attracts a penal provision that we discussed already. Now, the consequence of not spending also is that either you retain an amount required for something which is an ongoing project, either you retain the amount for an ongoing project, but if you haven't identified an ongoing project, or the ongoing project does not need the kind of outlay that is remaining unspent, in that case, the unspent money will have to go to a national unspent CSR fund. But until that fund is constituted, it will go to one of the funds listed in Schedule 7. For example, PM National Relief Fund. So that's one of the highlights of the amendments. And given the fact that only a couple of months are now left, only 2 months are left, if the company has not spent its target for 2021, then there might be immediately a need to either go and spend money. But if you think 2 months is too short to spend the money, at least identify ongoing projects and make them ongoing. That's one of the very, very important actionables. And I'll be discussing this part at some length as we proceed further. So that's the first major highlight. This highlight, of course, has to come along with the understanding of ongoing project. What exactly is needed to call a project ongoing? What exactly needed to call it a project? And then an ongoing project. These are things which require discussion. Another important change is that the definition of the word CSR. The rules have introduced a definition of the term CSR. Now, traditional professionals with, let's say, years of background and understanding of laws could probably bring in an argument of what is substantive law versus procedural law. And one could probably say this is a subordinate law. A subordinate law cannot bring in substantive changes in law. That's a sacred constitutional principle that lawmaking is the job of the parliament. Execution of the law is the job of the government. The government is the executive. The government does not have the authority to make a substantive law. So defining CSR and including or excluding certain things from CSR definition is more likely the job of the statute. And this one is a subordinate piece of law. Therefore, subordinate law can only do such things which are intended to be done by the main law. But these are things that over time people have forgotten. I think these are things that we have left far behind. And these days we find the rules are not just treading over the substantive law. They are filling the gap of the substantive law. They're probably sometimes supplementing the substantive law. They're probably also introducing penal provisions. So the rules do everything. I mean, quite often I've said that this earlier used to be the rule of law. Now it's law of rules. The rules seem to be driving the law. Sometimes even the forms are driving the law itself. But nevertheless, so there is a definition of CSR spending in the rules, which comes with several exclusions. Therefore, certain things will not qualify to be a CSR expense. And the fourth highlight is the carry backward of the spending. Like if there's a deficit in any year and there was an excess spending in any of the previous years, then the deficit can be carried backwards to be set off against the surplus that is excess spending in any of the previous years. That is what I call carry backward, and that's the fourth highlight. And the fifth and very, very important highlight is registration of implementing agencies. This is extremely important. Of course, there was a provision about this in the draft rules as well. And the concern was whether the MCA is actually meaning to regulate the entire NGO sector. It's not, seemingly as of now, it's not a regulation provision, it's merely a registration requirement. But I would not be surprised if going forward, this actually develops into some kind of a regulatory measure as well. But as of now, there's a need to register the implementation agencies. So we need to understand A, what's the meaning of implementing agencies? B, what is exactly the registration requirement? There's a reference to registration for income tax purposes as well. We need to understand that as well. Next highlight is impact assessment. For certain size of CSR spending, that is aggregate spending as also spending on a particular project. There are two thresholds, aggregate spending and spending on a particular project. Companies will not just be, companies cannot just relax after spending the money. They also need to see what impact has the spending made. What's the social impact? What's the social return of the expenditure done by the company? So that's what is meant by impact assessment. And this is also an immediate implementation. Now it would be interesting to examine whether this is actually applicable for FY 2021, because impact assessment is actually required for expenditure done in the previous years, and I'll talk about that as well. And the next highlight is throwing more of board responsibilities, particularly to ensure the spending is used for the purpose for which it was intended. That responsibility has been put on the board with some kind of certification from the CFO or the Chief of Finance. There are, of course, enhanced disclosures, including the action plan on the CSR projects also need to be disclosed on the company's website. And I would also add to the list and say, well, the provision about the capital assets, if the CSR spending has resulted into creation of a capital asset, then there is a provision about transfer of the capital asset, and there's a deadline for transfer of the capital asset to one of the entities, that is Section 8 companies or one of the entities listed in the rules. So these are the major changes, and we will be discussing each of these at some length. Let's first talk about the spending mandate. Like I mentioned, the statute itself, second provision to section 135/5, read with 135/6, elaborates the mandate of the spending. It says if the company fails to spend, second provision to 135/5 says, if the company fails to spend, the board shall explain the reason. So that explaining part is still there. That is, merely because you have unspent amount, and let's say the unspent amount is getting transferred to or is being retained for so-called ongoing projects, we're going to discuss that. That does not mean the board is absolved of the requirement of explaining. So what is the existing requirement, namely explanation in the board report, still remains. The board will still have to explain the shortfall and the reasons for the shortfall. Additionally, the board will also be required to analyze the unspent amount. Analysis of the unspent amount includes two components. Number one, the amount which could not be spent because the project is still not complete. The company has, let's say, initiated a CSR project. The project is not yet complete. The project is still going on. If the project is going on, I cannot say the amount is remaining unspent because I have a committed expenditure for a project, and that amount sooner or later will have to be spent. So there has to be, there is an ongoing project which is going on, and I'll discuss as to what's the meaning of going on. And this project needs some money. So I'm actually parking funds to be deployed in the so-called ongoing project. So identify ongoing projects, identify the expected outlay on those ongoing projects in future years. The future years, of course, is not indefinite. There's a time limit for that as well. So identify that. They identify the outlay required for ongoing project. That's one part. Second part, if I still have unspent funds which are even over and above the amount needed for ongoing project, then this amount, which is not so retained, will have to be transferred to National Unspent Fund. Within 6 months of the end of the financial year, this money has to go to the National Unspent Fund. National Unspent CSR Fund is not yet constituted. If it's not constituted within 6 months, then this amount will have to go to any of the funds specified in Schedule 7. As I'm sure you can recall, the funds specified in Schedule 7 include PM National Relief Fund, Swachh Bharat Kosh, PM Cares Fund. So the money will have to go to one of these funds if you are not retaining the money for an ongoing project. Now, do you actually have 6 months time for deciding whether to retain the money? The question basically is that now we got 2 months left. So do you still have liberty or luxury of time for deciding whether there is an obligation on the part of the company to transfer the money to unspent CSR fund, or the company has to take a call about retention for the so-called ongoing project immediately? Now, why am I saying that time is not actually 6 months? Is that because this retention or the obligation to transfer the money to unspent funds will itself require a board decision, and the reasons will also need to be disclosed. Reasons for not spending will form a part of the board's report as a part of the board report to the shareholders. And most companies actually prepare the board's report sometime, let's say 45 days at the end of the financial year, particularly listed companies. And therefore, effectively, the time for completing this analysis will actually not be 6 months. You got 2 months of the financial year left. You got 1.5 months of, let's say, before the ensuing board meeting for considering the board's report. And therefore, in my view, you basically have something like 1.5 months after the end of the financial year for deciding whether you are able to identify ongoing projects and retain the money for those, or you would actually like to transfer the money to National Unspent CSR Fund. You have a 6-month time frame only if you're not able to identify the money for a so-called ongoing project. So let's not think we have 2 months plus 6 months time. We don't have 8 months time. We have 6 months time for transferring the money to National Unspent CSR Fund or one of the Schedule 7 funds. We don't have 6 months for identification whether the amount is actually needed for ongoing projects. So let's straight come to understand number one, what is ongoing project? When can you call the project ongoing? And how do we identify the money needed for ongoing projects? So let's first understand the meaning of the term ongoing project. This is defined in Rule 2.1 Roman I of the rules. And it says it's a multi-year project stretching over more than one financial year. So first of all, we're referring to a CSR project. By the way, most CSR expenses pertain to projects. CSR is typically not a one-off exercise. It's not a simply check writing exercise. CSR envisages some kind of an underlying project. For instance, let's say building up a school is a project. Contributing to certain number of beds in a hospital is a project. Carrying pandemic relief is a project. So CSR essentially pertains to projects. And the project may be completed either during the financial year or the project may stretch to more than one financial year. If you have a project and the project is stretching to more than one financial year, but not longer than 3 years. So the idea basically is the project must be stretching to, first of all, must be stretching beyond the current financial year. It must have been initiated in 2021 and must be continuing at least in 2021-22. That's one condition. But the project cannot be like cannot be longer than 3 years from the end of the year in which the project is initiated. So we're talking about a project initiated in 2021. The project must have commenced in 2021, might be continuing into 2021-22, 22-23, and 23-24, and not beyond that. In other words, I cannot permanently keep lagging the money and leading it into next financial year for any number of years. I can at the most do it for 3 financial years only. Also, the project should have commenced. In order to call it ongoing, when can I call a project ongoing? Ongoing meaning what? Something is going on. Going on envisages that the project must have actually been initiated. So the idea is to include a project which has an identifiable completion date, commencement date, an identifiable completion date, and the expenses needed for such projects. Recurring expenses which are segregable by nature. For instance, every year the company, let's say, makes a contribution of, let's say, rupees 10 crores to a particular hospital. So once the company has done the contribution, 10 crores is already contributed. There is nothing called ongoing project there. The company has spent out the money. The contribution has gone to a school. The contribution has gone to a hospital. The contribution has gone to wherever the contribution was supposed to go. It's a recurring expense the company does every year. I cannot call it an ongoing project. Ongoing project would mean something which is actually a continuum starting from this year and stretching into the next year. And this ongoing project would need a certain committed expenditure. So the idea basically is there is a committed expense for a project which has already been initiated, and so as to call it ongoing. For example, you have installation of a new facility, or there is some kind of a binding commitment. The company has committed in order to call the project as an ongoing project. What is the trigger, or what is the evidence of having commenced the project? There is, of course, nothing called a stone laying ceremony in case of CSR project. I can probably say If the foundation stone has been laid, then the project is commenced. Most CSR projects will not have any such foundation laying ceremony. So when do we say project is ongoing? If the company has got a firm commitment to a particular CSR project, nothing has been done during the year, nothing has been spent during the financial year, can I still call it ongoing? In my view, in order to call a project an ongoing project, it is not necessary that at least some spending must have been done during the financial year. In other words, I would not necessarily link the ongoing status of a project with spending within FY 2021. Even if nothing is spent, but there is a firm commitment. There's a firm commitment to a project which has taken a concrete shape. It's not merely on a sort of, let's say, a outline mode. The project is envisaged, the project is concretized, and the company has done a firm commitment. I cannot say that I'll still not treat this money and I'll transfer this money to National Unspent CSR Fund, because the idea basically is the money is retained for something which would need to be spent. There is a commitment on the part of the company, the money has to be spent. So retention of the money for something which is a commitment on the part of the company, that is exactly what the intention of this provision is. So keeping the intent in mind, one should identify what are the projects which I can actually call it ongoing. The company has received a request for contribution. The company has passed a CSR committee resolution that the company will be spending the money, and the company has given such commitment letter to the beneficiary of the expenditure. The beneficiary of the expenditure has taken concrete steps to ensure that that project will actually be taking some concrete step. In that case, I would say the committed outlay to that project, in my perception, can still be called a commitment to an ongoing project, because otherwise, I mean, there's no sense. The commitment itself would lose its meaning. If I commit money to a project, but I don't retain the money because actually I've spent the money into a National Unspent CSR Fund, the issue basically is I'm actually going back on the commitment itself. So that's the idea of committed expenditure on an ongoing project. So in order to give a more concrete shape to it, this is what the company is expected to do before the end of the financial year. I'm trying to emphasize that this is something which requires urgent actionables. Well, while the draft rules did say that, but most CSR committees may not actually have seen, or most CSR committees may not have envisaged that this provision will get implemented during the financial year itself. As far as I'm concerned, I've consistently been saying that I expect the provision to be implemented within the financial year, but a lot of companies actually were not prepared for that. So this might have taken several CSR committees by surprise. However, let's understand this is what is to be done before the end of the year. What? Number one, you anyway know the CSR target for the year. CSR target for FY 2021 is not dependent on the performance for 2021. CSR 2020, financial year 2021 may not be a very good year for a lot of companies, but the target is based on average of last 3 years. So that's something that you already know. So we already know the CSR target. Let's call it target spending. Now, what is it that you expect to spend by end of the financial year? You would probably know what has been spent by January. What is the likely spending by February or March is something that you can probably, extrapolate at this point of time. So think of the total shortfall as the total target minus the total spending by end of the financial year. That's what I'll call total shortfall. Now identify what is it that I can call it ongoing project or ongoing projects. I have discussed what exactly is the meaning of ongoing projects earlier. So identify the ongoing projects. Now identify what is the outlay that the company has committed to such ongoing projects. Let's call it ongoing project outlay. So we have now the total shortfall and we have the ongoing project outlay. So now let therefore identify the transferable shortfall, that is transferable to the funds. Total shortfall minus total ongoing project outlay. This transfer shall have to be made within 6 months of the financial year, 6 months at the end of the year. In my perception, 6 months is the maximum time. If you have not identified the so-called ongoing projects by 31st March 2021, then first of all, retention itself is not common. The question of transferring within 6 months would come Only if the company is retaining, the board has taken a conscious decision to retain the money for ongoing project. If either ongoing projects are not there or the ongoing projects do not need an amount equal to the total shortfall, in that case 6 months maximum time is merely a luxury of time. I don't think that's actually advisable, because as a part of the board's report you'll be required to give a justification of what is the purpose of retention. So I would say sensibly, even before the preparation of the board report, the company should take steps forward and transfer the money to one of the funds so as to complete its CSR obligation. Whose obligation is it to identify the outlay required for ongoing project? Now, please understand that this obligation is very clearly on the board. You can read rule 4/6, and you can also read the penal provisions of 135/5, 135/6. To my mind, I have no doubt that this is basically the obligation of the board. Now, also understand that we retained the money for the ongoing projects, but the money was not spent. The ongoing project was, let's say, expected to be completed in FY 21-22, or the ongoing project was expected to be completed in over 2 years next, or over 3 years next. 3 years is the maximum anyway, but the ongoing project was to be completed, say, within FY 21-22. But that ongoing project has not eaten or not actually exhausted the entire outlay which we had earmarked for the ongoing project. In that case, within 30 days from the end of the third year, the rules say 30 days from the end of the third year, but I would actually take it to mean that in case the ongoing project is expected to be finished in next financial year itself, once we come to know that the earmarked outlay is not going to be fully exhausted, I should within 30 days next transfer the money once again to unspent CSR fund. So I'm not saying we will wait 30 days from the end of the third year for transferring the unutilized money. Once it becomes clear that the money will not be utilized, I should not stop, I should not refrain from transferring the money to the unspent CSR fund or one of the funds listed in Schedule 7. Now let's now come to the next part, which is what exactly will be the compliances for the board to ensure that there is identification of ongoing projects. So number one, timely identification of ongoing project, and the ongoing project needs to be a part of the CSR action plan. The ongoing project must also be part of the CSR action plan. Action plan is actually a new requirement. It wasn't there earlier, but I would imagine that now that the CSR committee still has 2 months time, the committees must meet and identify what all projects are actually to be regarded as ongoing. Well, most of you might have planned your board meetings in the second week of February or before that. So please do make sure that you make it a part of the agenda item to identify what all can be taken as ongoing project and which are expected to spill over beyond the end of the financial year. So please do identify that and have a complete action plan in terms of what is the likely timing of the outflows for these ongoing projects. There might be quite a bit of task, but this is something that you need to do soon enough, because I would not like to recommend taking a very aggressive or ambitious view of the provisions of 135/5 and 6, because I am aware that we have a penal provision in 135/7, and the penalties also on the officers of the companies. I would pretty much want to ensure that none of the officers of the company get into any such penalty stipulation. The board's disclosures required in case of retention. If you're retaining the money for ongoing project, you need to be given comprehensive disclosures as a part of the board's report, CSR report. So you need to be ensuring that you have identified the ongoing project. Now, the next highlight of the rules is that there is a definition of CSR expenditure in Rule 21D, and the definition excludes several items. And also see the definition starts by saying that CSR includes statutory obligation of the company. Statutory obligation. CSR was never envisaged as an statutory obligation. However, over time, as we discussed, it's matured into a statutory obligation. So the definition talks about a statutory obligation. And then it goes to define what are the exclusions. What are the exclusions from the definition of CSR funds? Sorry, exclusion from definition of CSR. And there are 6 exclusions which are quite important. Number 1, activities undertaken in pursuance of normal course of business. Activities outside India, contribution directly or indirectly to a political party, activities benefiting employees, sponsorships, and activities which are in response to statutory obligations. So 6 exclusions are there from the meaning of CSR. And of course, along with that, you need to also understand that CSR has to actually come out of Schedule 7. So the activities must necessarily be falling within Schedule 7, but the activities must not be one of these 6 types. The 6 exclusions are the exclusions from the definition of CSR, and we'll need to discuss briefly each of these 6 exclusions. Let's straight go. First, very important, activities in normal course of business. This is something that I've consistently been holding, and any of you might have heard me in the past on this topic would recollect that I've consistently mentioned that what the company does in ordinary course of business cannot be called CSR. If the company makes light bulbs in ordinary course of business, contributing such bulbs cannot amount to CSR activity. If the company makes biscuits, distributing such biscuits by way of a CSR contribution cannot amount to CSR. If the company makes hosiery, then using the hosiery for CSR does not amount to CSR. And if the company is making pharmaceuticals, using the pharmaceutical for CSR is also not a case of CSR. This is something that I've consistently been holding. Last year, and I'm sure you recall, during the COVID relief period, there were a couple of circulars from the MCA more about COVID relief. There was also one litigation in Delhi High Court, and the MCA provided some kind of affidavit where it was possibly mentioned that if the company is a pharmaceutical company, and the company is using pharmaceuticals for COVID relief, it cannot be denied the treatment of being a CSR expenditure. In other words, if you're a pharma company and using your own pharmaceuticals for CSR purposes, you may still treat that spending, which is actually in kind. You can still take the spending also as a CSR expense. This was a view being taken, and probably this view got some strength from the amendments in the rules made last year, where ordinary course of business was dropped from one of the provisions. Now, the definition of CSR itself excludes an activity in normal course of business. For example, what the company supplies by way of sale of goods or supply of services in normal course of business, whatever the company does in normal course of business should not form part of CSR. Merely to say that in normal course of business, I do it for a profit motive, and in CSR, I don't have the profit motive, will not take it out of the exclusions from CSR. But some people actually contend that normal course of business, I do it for profit making. In CSR, that profit element is missing, therefore my activity should still qualify as CSR. That's actually a wrong contention. So in my view, the amended rule clearly takes out any activity in normal course of business out of the purview of CSR, leaving only one exception, which is COVID research. That also comes with several conditions. If you're engaging yourself in COVID research for researching on the vaccines, which I guess by now that might have already been done. So that's the only carve out. Otherwise, any activity in normal course of business will not be treated as CSR expenditure. Activities benefiting employees, and this also leads us to the circulars last year, when there was a substantial movement of workers from major cities to their hometowns, and the question was, if the company is spending for migrant labor's relief work, will this amount to CSR? And NCA came with several circulars. You should be doing it for other employees, not your own employees. You can be doing it for can you be doing it for casual labor, etc., etc. There were several discussions around that. And once again, my view has been that whatever the company does for its employees, whether it does on account of an obligation of an employer or does in furtherance of employee welfare, these are typically employee welfare activities. the company doing anything for its employees, or the company doing anything for employees' families, that's employers' gesture toward the employees. That's not a social expenditure. Social expenses keeping the society at large as the beneficiary. That's the intent of a social spending. So now the amendment in the rules also says anything done for the benefit of employees will not form part of CSR spending, and the word employee has been defined with reference to Code on Wages Act. That long definition is there on the screen for you in case you want to read, but my issue basically is that essentially the activity should not be targeted to employees or the employees' families. Does that actually mean the employees cannot be beneficiary of a CSR project at all? I have a CSR project, social project. The project is meant for society at large. Does that mean my employees cannot be beneficiaries? Let's say, for instance, the company has spent on, let's say the company has constructed beds in a cancer hospital. The company has constructed beds or contributed beds to a cancer hospital. Very common, I mean, thing for many companies is to have beds in Tata Cancer Hospital or one of these institutions. My own employee cannot be beneficiary of that bed. Are we saying that my own employee cannot be admitted into that hospital? The hospital is a social institution. I am carrying a social program. Idea is not to oust my own employees. Idea is not to say my own employees will be outcasted. That's an extremely outrageous idea. As long as the project or spending is for a social cause, my employees also get benefited as a part of the society. They don't have a special privilege. They don't have a special reservation. They don't have a special, I mean, treatment there. But as organs or elements of society, there is nothing to oust or exclude my own employees. So idea cannot be to either exclude employees or families of employees. Just that the spending in question must be for the benefit of society at large and must not be intended for the employees of the company. That's the essence of the exclusion. Another exclusion, there were 6 exclusions we talked about, but one which is requiring discussion is the sponsorship. What exactly is meaning of sponsorships? Activities on sponsorship basis for deriving marketing benefit. That's exactly the expression. For example, you're sponsoring a sports event. To say that promotion of sports is a CSR activity, I'm sponsoring a sports event, that should actually count as CSR. These views were being taken, but a sponsorship is more like a marketing advantage. It's like a brand building exercise. With CSR, without CSR, companies have been sponsoring events. So sponsorship is not a social spending. Sponsorship is a marketing. That's a promotional spending. So if the company is sponsoring an event, it cannot claim the event sponsorship by whatever name you call it event partnership, gold partnership, or by whatever name. That cannot be regarded as CSR spending. However, once again, the idea is not to completely deny any marketing or brand building benefit from a CSR spending. For instance, one of the companies has built up, let's say, drinking water outlets across the city. And on the drinking water outlets, you find the logo of the company as well. And the company, of course, gets a marketing brand. There's a brand visibility. When the company has constructed, let's say, water outlets, it probably puts up its logo also. Let's say the company does a pollution awareness campaign on the buses flying in Bombay. And when there also the company puts its own brand, its own logo. Merely because the company puts a logo or gets a brand benefit, there's a brand asset being created. That does not deprive the expenditure of the CSR status. The idea basically is that the spending is not merely calculated for a CSR, calculated for a brand asset. Now, we also discussed about carrying backward of a shortfall to a past year where there might have been a surplus spending. If the company has got a surplus spending, it can be carried forward to be set off against CSR shortfall in any of the 3 years. Any of the 3 succeeding years, immediately succeeding years, any of the 3 succeeding years, the company may set off that against a shortfall. So that's, I don't think we need to discuss further. Of course, there needs to be a board resolution for the set off. So the question is, board resolution will actually do what? Board resolution is for taking the excess to a future year, or the board resolution is for a set off? To my mind, take the excess is a done thing. That is something which has happened. That's a matter of fact. There's no question of a decision of the board on that. But the decision of the board will be in the year of shortfall. If you want to set off the shortfall against the surplus spending in a previous year, that's where the resolution of the board will be required. There's quite a lot of lawmaking on implementation agencies, and I think that's a very important part of the rules is implementing agencies. What exactly is expected there, and that's a very important change. So we'll be spending some time discussing this. What exactly is the meaning of the implementation agencies? So the rules now say that if you have implementing agencies through which CSR spending is CSR is being implemented. What exactly is the meaning of implementing agencies? I must specify here that there are two important registrations. There is registration with the MCA, but even more important than that is registration with the income tax department. That's probably where there'll be even more confusion. So let's discuss that very quickly. Let's first talk about what exactly is the meaning of implementation agencies. Implementing agency actually does what? The company maybe is doing CSR activity itself. In that case, the company is the one which is doing the activity, and the beneficiary of the activity could be any of the social bodies or NGOs or let's say society at large, which is the beneficiary of the activity. For example, take the case of Tata Cancer Hospital once again. If the company is contributing money and the money is going to Tata Cancer Hospital, the company is the principal which is doing the spending. Tata Cancer Hospital is the beneficiary of the money. The money goes directly from the company to Tata Cancer Hospital. There is no implementing agency in between. But many large corporate houses have implementing agencies too. Many of those are in form of foundations. For example, XYG Group Foundation. Most of the large business houses have formed foundations, trusts or foundations which sort of aggregate the CSR spending targets of a particular group of entities, and from there on the money goes to the respective beneficiaries. Why do groups do that? The reasons may be variegated, but if I were to think of what could be the reasons, I would probably say, well, number one, it could be aggregation of several companies within the group. Several entities within the group could be contributing the CSR funds into the group foundation. It could therefore be aggregation, or largely to save the company itself from the drudgery, from the hassles of identification of CSR opportunities, coordination with end beneficiaries, monitoring the implementation, etc. So all of this is a task. And well, let's understand that companies don't have the time or the bandwidth to monitor that on a regular basis. So implementing agencies would probably be taking care of that. So if the company has implementation agencies, then the question of implementing agencies needing registration comes in. So in case of self-implementation by the company could be implementing itself, no question of intermediaries. Joint implementation by two or more companies, once again, no question of implementing agencies. Implementing agency would mean intermediaries through which the CSR targets are being, or CSR spending is being channelized. The end beneficiary is not implementing. The point I was like to stress is that the end beneficiary of an expense is not an implementation agency. Implementation agency is the intermediary through which the funds are routed. The rules talk about 4 types of such implementing agencies. That's rule 4/1, very important rule. And I would call them by these 4 names. Number 1, captives. Captive meaning the company's own implementing body. Captive, for example, XYG Group Foundation. Government agencies, if at all the government has any such agencies. Statutory bodies, I cannot think of any, but that's also one possibility. And fourthly, public agencies, meaning agencies which are not captive to a particular company, but which are existing in general for carrying out CSR work. Now, there might be potentially 2 types of registrations, MCA registration and income tax registration. Let's first talk about income tax registration, because that's really a That requirement wasn't there in the draft rules. That's a new requirement. Now the rules say that the captives as well as public implementation bodies will need registration under section 12A as well as section 80G of the Income Tax Act. If you read the rules, the word registered under section 12A and section 80G of the Income Tax Act is coming. At the end of the expression, registered society, the actual reading of the rules seems to suggest that the word is coming exactly after. It's the exact rule, the exact reading of the rules. If I were to put that exact language of the rules also on the screen, the exact language goes as follows. So I'm trying to put the exact language on screen so that we can see what exactly is the rule trying to say. I'll read it from the exact text of the rules. It's saying, I'll exactly read the exact words from there. Rule 4/1. And this is coming in rule 4/1A and in rule 4/1D. 4/1A relates to captives, 4/1D pertains to public bodies. So exact languages: a company established under section 8 of the Act, or registered public trust, or a registered society, registered under registered society, then there's a comma, registered under section 12A and 80G of the Income Tax Act. Is it referring to registered society registered under section 1280G, or is it referring to each of the three types of bodies, section 8 company, public trust, as well as societies? Now, on the face of it, I don't see a reason. I don't see any reason as to why the requirement should be limited to. So that's the exact language, and you can see the way it's mentioned. These words registered under section 12A 80G are coming exactly after registered society, but the preceding words, the preceding types of entities are actually three: section 8 companies, registered public trust, and registered societies. Is there a rationale, is there a reason to say that the registration requirement is limited to only societies and does not extend to each of the three types of bodies? I don't see a rationale at all, because section 11, 12, 13 of Income Tax Act, as you might recollect, pertains to charitable trusts. Section 11, 12, 13 is primarily for trusts. So to say that societies would need registration for income tax purposes, but trusts and section 8 companies would not need it, does not seem to be making sense. So in my view, registration is required for each of the three types of bodies. And that then comes the next requirement, which is MCA registration. MCA registration talks about registration with MCA. Now, I must say that this is registration, not regulation. And it says that each of the four types of bodies, captives or public bodies or statutory authorities or government bodies, each of them need to be registered with the MCA. Registration is therefore required for all the four types of entities, whereas income tax registration is required only for captives and for public bodies. And this also comes with a grandfathering provision that registration requirements actually kick off from 1st April, but CSR projects or programs approved prior to 1st April 2021 do not have to insist on registration. That would mean if you have approved a program, the key is the approval of the program. If you approve the program before 1st April, in that case, you don't need to ensure that there is registration with the implementing body. Otherwise, the obligation is on the board. This obligation also is on the board. The board will have to ensure that the spending is being done through only entities registered with the MCA. The next highlight requirement is impact assessment. I was mentioning earlier that mere spending is not enough. You need to ensure that there is effective I mean, the social spending is having a social impact. So assessing the impact of a social spending, that's exactly what is sometimes also called social rate of return. Social rate of return. That also needs to be done. And the trigger for this requirement is twofold. Number one, total spending obligation of the company should be averaging to 10 crores or above over the last 3 years. Over the last 3 years, if the company's total CSR spending was rupees 10, target spending was 10 crores, actual spending might be less than 10 crores also. Target spending was 10 crores or more over the last 3 years. Each of the last three, average spending over the last 3 years was 10 crores or more. Then, and the outlay for the project is rupees 1 crore or more. In that case, the company will have to carry out impact assessment by independent agencies. What sort of agencies? What will be the reporting framework? When will the impact assessment will have to be done? To whom is it addressed, etc. are questions remaining unanswered, but I'm trying to find some answers from some bit of broad research. First of all, understand that impact assessment pertains, impact as per the rules, impact assessment is to be done after 1 year from completion of a project. But if the CSR project is completed, say in 2021, the question of assessing impact will come after a lag of 1 year. But that's exactly when the impact gets known. For example, if you built, let's say, toilets in a particular area, whether the toilets are still working well, are they serving the purpose for which they were built, are people still able to use them, you need to allow a lag of time. So you need to allow a lag of time for the social expectations to be fulfilled. It's a assessment of social expectations being fulfilled. So first of all, there's a lag of 1 year. On the face of it, the requirement for impact assessment is applicable immediately. That would mean it applies to 2021 also. But the question is for what kind of projects? If we allow a time lag of 1 year, then impact assessment carried out in 2021 will actually have to pertain to projects done in 18-19. So there's a substantial, I mean, retroactivity in the provision to say that what we did in 18-19 will have to be assessed in 2021. To my mind, I mean, while technically the provision becomes effective immediately, but I think fairly speaking, we should actually allow 1 year's lag, and impact assessment should actually be done for the projects completed in FY 2021 after completion of FY 21-22. I've also mentioned what exactly might be the, I mean, the format of impact assessments. There is an International Association of Impact Assessment, and that association has a website which has a guidance also. You might also see some examples of several PSUs which have carried out impact assessments. So the bodies typically are those which have outreach to rural areas, academic institutions or research entities. They do it. It's reported to board of directors. Is it going to be a regular feature? Is it like every year we need to carry out impact assessment of the same project which has been assessed already? I don't think that's envisaged. If the project is of a capital nature and is going to have an enduring value, to my mind, it should be okay to do an impact assessment on a rotational basis. So think of a rotational program where, let's say, after a lag of, let's say, on rotation basis, every third year, a project would be assessed in terms of its impact assessment. I was talking about enhanced board responsibilities. So rule 4/1, 4/5, and 4/6 say that the board of the company shall have to satisfy that the funds disbursed have been utilized for the purpose and the manner is approved by the board. And the CFO or a person responsible for financial management shall certify the same. That would mean there's a responsibility on the CFO, and the responsibility actually travels over to the board. The responsibility therefore is on the board and the CFO. And of course, there are enhanced disclosures as well. I'll not be spending time discussing those. Among the last of the changes, there's a change about surplus arising from CSR activity. What exactly is the meaning of surplus arising from CSR activity? Well, CSR activities mostly do not result into any, I mean, dividends. They don't result into any inflows, but some CSR activities actually might. For instance, let's say the company's built a school and called it CSR, and the school results into fees. The fees might be an inflow. Either the surplus is plowed back in the school itself, but if there's still a net surplus, the net surplus will either be plowed back in the same project
or will be transferred to one of the funds. Last point is about capital assets. If people had any doubt, if at all people had any doubt about who owns the capital assets created by CSR activities, the rules actually, I mean, make it clear. To my mind, this was always clear. As far as I'm concerned, it was always clear that any capital asset created by CSR belongs to society. In any case, the rules now make it clear that that capital asset should actually be vested, and there is a time frame of 180 days, 6 months, for transferring the capital assets from 22nd January onwards, 6 months time. That would mean, if at all you think that you own capital assets created by CSR, the assets must actually go to the society. So I think this is the essence of the changes in the rules. Very important change, and given the fact that the time frame is quite small, you also need to have an action plan along with CSR policy. So policy going forward will have an action plan as well. And as I mentioned, this is my first recorded lecture on the subject, and I intend to learn a lot more in course of interactions. I'll probably be having several workshops in time to come on this very interesting topic, and would look forward to interacting with professionals. But this was an attempt to have a recorded video lecture, which is for the benefit of all who possibly may or may not be able to participate in the workshops that will be conducted in future. But thank you very much for being a patient listener, and once again, a very happy Republic Day, and thank you very much.